On today's video, dealing with laziness and apathy. They're difficult problems, and we'll come up with some potential solutions, some from early Buddhism coming right up. I'm Doug Smith. I'm director of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. And also consider checking out my new online mini course, free mini course over at the Online Dharma Institute. You can get it from the link up here. Also have a new course out, Introduction to the Buddha's Teaching, which may be of interest to you if you're interested in learning more. And there's a 20% off deal for this first month that the course on the Introduction to the Buddha's Teaching is out. And also there's the online mini course, the free mini course that you can watch at your leisure. So check them out if you're interested. Laziness and apathy. Laziness and apathy are a problem for many of us. And there are, of course, there are going to be any number of issues involved with laziness and apathy for many. One of the things that the Buddha does discuss, which is related, although I'm going to sort of argue is a little bit different, but nevertheless I think it's something we should discuss, is being tired. Because tiredness makes us lazy, makes us apathetic. And there's a sutta where the Buddha discusses various ways to get over our tiredness. He gives us a number of strategies that we can use. A first strategy is when you're tired, sometimes doing, let's say, a strict mindfulness or even worse, a calming meditation is really not going to help anything. It's just going to make you want to go to sleep. And so what he suggests in those situations is first to consider the teachings. In other words, to sort of think about the teachings rather than to just do regular meditation. And if you're thinking about the Dharma, thinking about the teachings, thinking about questions or concerns about them, I think that is going to be a way to sort of maybe stir your mind up a little bit. He also recommends reciting the teachings. Now, this is something that is probably lost to many of us nowadays because we don't tend to memorize and recite teachings. But it's something that we could consider. We could consider perhaps memorizing something. It's not something I've done, but it's something one could certainly do. Or we could, just give an impromptu talk, the way that I'm doing on these videos, to ourselves, to a room if we have an empty room, just to sort of wake ourselves up. That's an option, give a little impromptu talk on the Dharma, on some issue of the Dharma, just to sort of wake yourself up. Now he also gives a couple of strategies that it's kind of interesting. It's clear from the text that these are strategies that he was intending us to use at night when doing meditation at night, and I think we can imagine the reason for that. Because the monastics would regularly meditate long into the darkness, either at night, that is to say after they had, after the day had gone, or in the early morning before the sun had risen. And you can imagine that in these kinds of situations, people would often be sort of nodding off. And so one thing that he recommends is to wash your face with water. I assume it would be sort of cold water. Wash your eyes, wash your face with water. That'll wake you up. He then suggests looking up at the stars. So, clearly he's intending you to do this or expecting you to do this at night with the stars out. So you look up at the stars, sort of wake yourself up that way. Another thing he recommends is to meditate on light. So in other words, to try to envision bright light in your mind. To sort of take your mind out of the darkness in the sense that, the darkness might make you sleepy. Meditating on a bright light, thinking about bright light might, in that sense, wake you up. Now, I must say, admittedly, I've tried this and it hasn't worked for me, but that's not to say it won't work for you. So that's another thing that he suggests. And the two last ones I think are pretty, straightforward. One of them is to do walking meditation. So instead of doing seated meditation or even worse, lying down meditation, walk, get up and do a walking meditation where you, if you haven't done walking meditation, it can be a very fruitful way of meditating. What you want to do is to pick a short space, maybe 10 meters or so, 10 yards. It doesn't have to be very long, maybe a little bit longer if you have that space. And then just walk walk that space up and back, up and back. And what you're trying to do is, whereas in breathing meditation, you're paying attention to your breaths as they go in and go out, in walking meditation, you're doing the same thing, except you're paying attention to your footfalls. As you move your foot up, as you carry your foot over, as you put your foot down, and so on. It's this kind of repetitive motion, which is very similar to breathing. And indeed, you can even do them at the same pace. You breathe while you walk. So it's a very similar kind of strategy, kind of a practice, but it's the sort of thing that will kind of wake you up a bit. And last, he suggests that if none of this stuff works, that you should lie down and take a short nap. And I think that is a very good advice. Many of us, I think, are sleep deprived in one way or another. And so laziness and apathy can simply be a byproduct of not getting enough sleep. And so when we sit down to meditation, we just sort of nod off, and it's not very productive. And so I think in that circumstance, maybe take a short nap. What he recommends is once you wake up from the nap, try to get up immediately rather than just sort of lying there, because lying there promotes apathy and laziness. So when you wake up from the nap, get up and, go back to whatever it was you were doing, or in this case, perhaps doing meditation. So that's sort of a tiredness and sleepiness, which can be a part of laziness and apathy, but I think laziness and apathy really at their base are a deeper problem. And so I want to get into that now, having left aside the issues about sleepiness. I think laziness and apathy are problems having to deal with how we bring up energy into our practice, and how we relate to the world in ways that either bring us energy or that don't. And in particular, I think the problem here of our relating to the world has to do with our impressions of what I would say are dangers, the Buddha calls dangers in the world, and our sense of unsatisfactoriness in the world. The first problem I think there are two problems here that relate to different ways that we can relate to these dangers and this unsatisfactoriness. The first one I'm going to deal with relates to a question by Irawatidai, who asks about apathy in his own life and sort of not being able, I think, to sort of get the requisite effort to actually put into the practice. And here, I think one issue can be that if we don't see the dangers, if we don't see the unsatisfactoriness up close enough, we can sort of become apathetic. For example, the Buddha talks about our reactions to three kinds of feelings. So, for example, we have, in the Buddha's understanding, in the Buddha's analysis of the mind, feeling here doesn't mean emotion. It means are either positive or negative, that is to say, pleasant or unpleasant feelings. So we get pleasant feelings and unpleasant feelings through things that we see, things that we touch, things that we smell and taste, things that we hear. So we find them either pleasant or unpleasant. We find them either pleasant or painful, is another way to put it. But each of those has its dangers. And in particular, in the middle is the feelings that are neutral, that are neither pleasant nor painful. And most of our feelings during the day are sort of neutral feelings. And if we tend to, be surrounded by things that give us neutral feelings, then what the Buddha says is that can foment ignorance in us. It can basically be a condition for the arising of ignorance. And we might ask, how would that be? Well, the idea is that if we are surrounded by and paying attention to the neutral feelings in our lives, that can make us feel kind of meh, that we sort of don't care. It doesn't stir us to action one way or the other. It doesn't stir us to grab for the thing that would be the positive or pleasant feelings. It doesn't stir us to push them away. That would be our tendency for the neutral, for the negative or the painful feelings. Instead, it's sort of a meh. So we sort of relax into a kind of blinkered kind of ignorance, where we just sort of don't care. And I think that can be a problem for many of us if our lives are sort of in between, like we have, let's say, a job that's it's not terrible and it's not a job we love, but it's a job that we sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis, let's say. And that can, that can promote this kind of apathy. And if this is your problem, if this is our problem in our lives, then one of the ways we can deal with it is to try to spend some time focusing on the unsatisfactory nature of the world and of our lives. The way that our lives can be better. Now, we don't want to do this in order to promote depression. That would certainly not be very skillful. But we want to do it to give ourselves some energy. To say to ourselves, really things could be better here. Things are sort of meh, they're okay, they're neutral, but they could be better. And they could be better if we worked on it, So to focus a little bit of time and effort on the things in our lives that really are unsatisfactory, and the way that our lives are unsatisfactory, the way the world is unsatisfactory in many respects. And I think that spending a little bit of time may give us the energy to move forward. Now, for many people, this is not going to be an effective strategy. I would say for many people are going to say that their lives are perfectly satisfactory. They're happy. They're happy as far as it goes, and their life seems perfectly nice. And so they're not particularly interested in thinking about its downsides or its dangers. But I'm expecting that most of you who are here watching a video on the Dharma of early Buddhism are probably already beginning to see some issues here that are bringing you to these kinds of teachings. And so it might be more useful to you than it would be to somebody else. And one does have to find the right teaching. We all have to find the right teachings for ourselves at the time. Also, the Buddha recommends, and this is a particularly strong kind of meditation, are meditations on death, on the fact that we will die, that we will pass away, and that those that we love, that those that are closest to us will pass away. That can be the kind of awareness of unsatisfactoriness that can perhaps make a difference. That is perhaps arguably the most unsatisfactory feature of our lives, as illness, old age, and death, in particular death. And it's also, as a result, one of the ones that we tend to not think about very often. We tend to push it away. And since we don't think about it, it doesn't come up in our minds, we get apathetic until the rubber hits the road, and then all of a sudden we're faced with it. So the Buddha says, talking about mindfulness of death, he says, "Suppose your clothes or head were on fire. In order to extinguish it, you'd apply intense enthusiasm, effort, zeal, vigor, perseverance, mindfulness, and situational awareness. In the same way, in order to give up these bad, unskillful qualities, that mendicant, that is to say that practitioner, should apply outstanding enthusiasm, effort, zeal, vigor, perseverance, mindfulness, and situational awareness." So here where he's talking about practicing like your clothes or hair were on fire, your head was on fire, it comes in the context of thinking about death. And from a traditional perspective, the reason that this practice is so necessary is that our unskillful practices, that is to say, the things that we do that are unskillful in our lives, lead to the accumulation of bad karma, which then can lead to a future lifetime that is painful. Either a lifetime in some hell realm, or in an animal realm, or in some bad human life. That is the traditional understanding, and that's one of the reasons why the Buddha says, you should really, when you're reflecting on death, that should get you to give you energy, the same energy you would have as if you were on fire, as if your clothes were on fire. Even from a more secular perspective, we can come at the same problem with the same kind of zeal, because we know that we ourselves are going to pass away. We know that those closest to us are going to pass away. We know that we are going to have to confront death directly, probably at various times during our lives. And what we want to do is to put ourselves into a position where we are most prepared for it. And of course, there's going to be only a limited amount that we can do in advance, because, when the rubber hits the road, when things get really deep and difficult, when they actually are on top of us, we're going to find the problems quite a bit deeper than we would when we're sitting perfectly in a neutral kind of feeling tone in our bedroom, let's say, doing meditation. But every little bit counts. And so this is one of the ways that we can perhaps gain a little bit of energy by thinking about the reality of death and putting that as a sort of a spur to our action. And it can help us along the way. So it will, of course, the idea is it will help us close to death when death comes near to us. But perhaps even more importantly, or just as importantly, it will help us along the way by giving us impetus, by giving us energy in our normal practice, so that our day-by-day life is therefore made a bit fuller. And finally, I would say that if these kinds of pointers that I've given aren't useful to you, if you don't find them useful, if thinking about death doesn't interest you, or you can't even generate zeal and energy with that kind of contemplation, then it may simply be that these practices aren't right for you right now in your life, and that perhaps you need to take some time away. Sometimes what apathy and laziness are telling us is that we're really not, it's just not right for us right now. And so perhaps we can take some time off and come back to the practices later on when our life makes clear to us the importance of energy and brings the energy to us in a way that we can actually put to use doing the practices. We can't, not all of us, especially because we're lay people, we have our own lives. Sometimes the practices just don't fit right into where we are in our journey right now. Now, there's a second problem with apathy and laziness that came up with a question from Afanasy Bushmanov, who asks more, it's a slightly different problem. In fact, I would say it's almost the opposite problem, where Afanasy talks about being apathetic because he just feels beaten down by the terrible political situation that he sees around us now. The issue in society and politics can be sort of grinding, and we're confronted with problems, hatreds, greed in the news all the time. It seems like it's not the sort of thing that we can deal with. We certainly are too small individually to fix all of this. And so we just feel beaten down. We feel apathetic as a result. We feel just like there's no point to practice because what the hell can we do? And I think I absolutely do sympathize with this problem because I feel this sometimes myself too. But as I say, this is a problem which is the opposite to the last. The last problem we had was basically not being able to see enough danger in our lives, not being able to see enough of the unsatisfactoriness in our lives, and as a result being apathetic because you just don't see things as particularly problematic. In this case, we're seeing too much danger in our lives. We're seeing too much unsatisfactoriness in the world. And so as a result, we're overwhelmed by it. And so we sort of feel like there's nothing we can do, and we're sort of frozen, sort of like a deer in the headlights kind of thing. And in this case, we want, therefore, the opposite kind of treatment. Whereas in the last one we said we should do a practice of focusing on unsatisfactoriness. In this case, what we do is we don't want to focus so much on the unsatisfactoriness. We want to turn our minds towards the better things in the world. Turn our minds towards the fact that there have been in the past wise and influential people who have done good. That nowadays there are wise and influential people trying to do good and having some success at it. That in the past we have been in very bad situations before, situations which at the time seemed, for different reasons, but nevertheless seemed at the time to be just as bad as situations do now. We've had issues with the potential for calamitous nuclear conflict. We've had world wars where millions of people have been conscripted into armies in order to kill one another. We've certainly had governments in leading states in Europe and Asia where the heads of those governments were tyrants of the worst sort, who were able to do virtually anything they wanted. And we got over them. And we got over them when we got to where we are now, or at least we got to better situations. And so we have to think of it in these sort of longer terms, and think of it in terms of the good people who are doing good in the world now. Another way to put this is that in the last case, we were looking at the first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering, in order to raise some zeal and energy in us. In this circumstance, what we should be trying to do is sort of look at the third noble truth, the noble truth of the overcoming of suffering, the extinguishment of suffering, in order to see that there are potential ways out, or at least there are potential things that we can do to make things better. And even if we may feel overwhelmed by the larger political and social situation, we can still make a difference in our community, in our family, among our friends, in our business, with our co-workers. There are things that we can do on a local scale to make things better for people around us, even if we may not be able to do as much as we would like in the broader scale. Because in the broader scale, at the end of the day, it depends on too many causes and conditions, and reasonably that's going to be outside of our scope. We can do only what we can do, which, should be enough for most of us. And of course, if we happen to have the opportunity to do something big, then great, go for it. Be one of the real change leaders. But if we're not, then at least focus on people close to us. And also, we can do small things like smiling, like even forcing ourselves sometimes to smile. The great meditation teacher Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, he recommends people, when they're seated in formal meditation, to smile. Just to smile very slightly. It's sort of that sort of slight Buddha smile. And as a result, he says that he believes that sort of wakens within us a bit of gladness. And I think there is some scientific evidence behind that simply putting a smile on your face can change your mood. Very slightly, perhaps. It will feel forced, for sure, when you begin it, but it's a start, and it's at least something you can put into your practice. It's very easy to do. It doesn't take any time or effort. Something to do in your practice just to sort of gladden your mind a little bit and to sort of overcome that tendency towards apathy through feeling sort of saddened, or really it's sort of a mild depression, really. And again, things that we can do to combat depression, mild depression here. We're not talking about the serious stuff. The serious stuff you want professional help. But for mild depression, getting out, being among people, doing things, staying busy, putting a smile on your face when you're doing some meditation. Also, the jhana teacher, the very fine jhana teacher Lee Brasington, says that he recommends one of the things that we can focus on in order to raise feelings of joy within us is a slight smile, and then focusing on the smile while we're doing meditation, when we're calmed down. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you find these talks useful, if they're making a difference in your life, consider helping us out over on Patreon. Check out my Patreon page. Give us a help. Please consider subscribing, give it a thumbs up, share it with people you might think might be interested, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. And meanwhile, all of you do be well.